My neighbor kept flirting with my wife. I told her she was just being friendly. Then I saw him drop off chocolate hearts. I gave them to his wife with a handwritten card I didn't write. They're in counseling now. I believed in quiet streets, in fences, in the idea that neighbors were harmless, that civility protected the sanctity of homes and marriages, until Marcus Hale moved in next door. A man who smiled too perfectly, who complimented too smoothly, who spoke in a cadence that made the world feel like it revolved around him. And he didn't even bother hiding the way he looked at Sarah, my wife, the woman who had been my anchor for 7 years. Warm, trusting, beautiful in ways that made strangers stop mid-step, laugh nervously, and suddenly feel small. The kind of woman whose presence demanded respect, yet inspired admiration from the kind of men who see relationships as challenges, prizes, and conquests. At first I told myself it was nothing, a casual, neighborly kindness, and even Sarah believed it, smiling too brightly, laughing too freely, brushing off the tiny electric moments of tension I felt in my chest. But every laugh, every glance, every timed coincidence, where he would appear at the mailbox, at the grocery, on the sidewalk, when she happened to be outside, stacked upon one another like a silent crescendo, building a pressure I couldn't ignore, a storm I didn't yet know how to confront. And when I first saw him leaning against the mailbox on a rainy Sunday, arms folded, posture too relaxed, eyes fixed on her as if evaluating, cataloging, deciding, I froze, watching a man who did not belong there, whose presence was calculated, whose smile was both dagger and deception. And when he grinned at me, eyes flicking back to Sarah, calling us the most beautiful couple, I knew instantly this was not kindness. It was a performance, an assault disguised in charm, a predator testing the boundaries of a life that wasn't his. The next week, the escalation became tangible, visceral, undeniable. I arrived home early, parking the car, and froze in the driveway when I saw him standing too close to her on the porch, laughter spilling between them like an invisible thread tying them together in some private conspiracy, commenting that she looked stunning in red, the type of remark that no husband should hear, and when she laughed it off, when she insisted he was harmless. I felt the first real surge of anger, tempered only by my love for her and my desire not to be the jealous, controlling husband, not realizing that restraint can be dangerous when the threat is deliberate, that patience is lethal when someone intends to violate trust. The days that followed were a pattern of quiet invasion. Runs timed to her coffee breaks, casual chats that lingered too long, compliments that edged into suggestions, remarks that hinted at desire, each one a needle pressing into the seam of our marriage, and she dismissed it, just being friendly, her eyes soft, her words gentle. My protests brushed aside, and I told myself she was right, I was overreacting. Yet my gut burned with the recognition that some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed, and predators only need a sliver of permission to advance, to escalate, to plant the seeds of destruction in places they have no right to touch. Then came the Tuesday that destroyed illusion entirely, ordinary at first glance, rain still dripping from gutters, motion lights flickering when I carried the trash out and saw him, hood up, hunched, hands full, placing a red bag on our porch like it was a gift to the universe and not a direct strike at the core of my life. A bag filled with chocolate hearts, carefully wrapped, and a handwritten note tucked inside. The kind of gift that speaks in language a wife never asked for. And when Sarah arrived holding groceries, she paused, confused, asking what it was, fumbling for an answer, and I told her the truth, watched her face pale, watched confusion flare into defensiveness. And yet, in that moment, something snapped in me, something precise, controlled, cold, a version of myself I had kept restrained until then. A man who realized the predator doesn't need a fight to win, only an unguarded spouse, only a silence I could no longer tolerate. I opened the card, 6 words that carried venom, intimacy, and intent all at once. For the woman who deserves more. Unsigned, deliberate, and Sarah staggered back as though struck, her lips trembling, insisting nothing had happened, that she had never encouraged him, that it was harmless. But the damage was done. Belief no longer mattered when the line had been crossed in plain sight. I didn't shout. I didn't rage. I didn't storm next door. Instead, I calculated, precise and surgical. A blank card, the original note inserted, and one line I did not write but which would leave a mark he could not erase. Last night was unforgettable, and I carried it. Steady, calm to Lena, his wife standing at her door, exhausted, wary, her eyes hollow with the invisible weight of suspicion and fear, and I handed her the bag. Simple words. These were left for my wife. You should see them. The transformation was immediate. Color drained from her face. Hands shook. She whispered, "Thank you," and closed the door. Behind her, the house erupted in shouts, crashes, confrontation, the quiet detonation of a marriage built on lies, assumptions, and entitlement. While outside, the street remained oblivious, unknowing, as I returned home, placing my hands on the counter, heart still, aware that I had not destroyed, but revealed, not broken, but exposed the consequences of betrayal. Marcus did not appear the next morning. By Friday, he was moving suitcases, pale, tight-jawed, avoiding my gaze, a man cornered by his own misjudgment, his own desire, while Sarah sat across from me, hands white-knuckled, whispering, "Ethan, what did you do?" And in that moment, I saw her recognition of a version of me I had never shown. A man who would not negotiate with predators. A man who understood that silence is consent, inaction is permission, and that some threats demand measured, surgical, undeniable response. We spoke finally without shouting, without excuses, and I told her everything. The drop-off, the note, the added line, the delivery to Lena, the explosion across the street, and her eyes widened in shock, disbelief, a realization that neither of us had been entirely honest with each other, that trust is a living thing, fragile, and that the smallest cracks, the tiniest omissions can let destruction in. And then, the words she whispered, soft, trembling, "We need to talk," hung like smoke in the room, a harbinger of the truth I already knew. The real battle wasn't with Marcus or his wife. It was within our walls, within the spaces between us, within what we didn't say, what we assumed, what we ignored. And I realized coldly that marriage is defended not with softness, not with compromise, but with clarity, boundaries, and consequences delivered without hesitation. Predators don't need confrontation. They need opportunity, and I had denied him every chance, exposed him to his own deceit, while simultaneously facing the uncomfortable truth that Sarah's omissions had created their own vulnerabilities, and that protecting a marriage sometimes demands a ruthless, precise, and almost merciless approach. By the time night fell, the street was quiet again, but nothing about us was the same. Eyes more alert, words more considered, the air taut with unspoken truths. And I understood that some lessons are learned only in the harshest light. Some predators only confronted with surgical precision, and some marriages only survive when the bond is defended with cold clarity, unyielding resolve, and the unwavering recognition that violation, no matter how subtle, no matter how harmless, cannot go unanswered. The day ended with Sarah sitting beside me, silent, thoughtful, the first real cracks of fear and understanding passing between us. And I knew this was only the beginning, a test of endurance, of vigilance, of emotional survival, a proof that some men, some marriages, and some predators must be met not with anger, not with pleading, but with strategy, consequence, and the unwavering enforcement of respect. And that from the shadows of a quiet street, the battle for a marriage's soul had begun. The morning after the delivery to Lena, the house felt hollow, heavy with an invisible weight, as if every corner, every wall, every silent creak carried the knowledge of what had occurred. Sarah moved through the kitchen cautiously, eyes down, hands fidgeting, avoiding mine, and when she finally spoke, her voice trembled with the kind of confession I had both expected and dreaded. Marcus had messaged her multiple times, each message layered with subtle admiration, each word a probe, a test, a claim on territory that was not his, and she admitted to replying once. Polite, flattered, careful not to encourage, careful to maintain the line she thought she had, but in truth had never fully maintained. And I listened, still, controlled, cold, knowing that the real violation had never been physical. It had been emotional, a silent erosion of boundaries, a slow leak of trust that allowed a predator to inch forward while we smiled, laughed, and pretended nothing mattered. I asked her every detail, every word, every nuance of tone, every implication in his messages, and as she recounted them, calling her beautiful, envying our marriage, hinting she deserved more, suggesting his own marriage lacked what ours had, I felt the cold, precise spike of anger transform into strategy. Marcus had assumed audacity and yet had no idea that his intentions were being cataloged, analyzed, prepared for a reckoning so surgical that even he would not survive its clarity without consequence. The knock came next, sharp, insistent, undeniable, and when Marcus appeared on the porch, face flushed, eyes wide with disbelief and fury, body tense with the misplaced confidence of a man who thought charm could armor him from reality, I didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't escalate. I let him speak, letting every accusation spill, letting him claim with trembling voice that I had set him up, that I had destroyed his marriage, that Sarah had wanted the attention, and I listened with a patience that was lethal, letting the weight of his own admissions hang in the air until he realized too late that the predator he believed himself to be was now the prey. I spoke only once, calm, deliberate, every word a scalpel cutting through the facade. He had destroyed his marriage the moment he pursued my wife, the moment he treated her attention as a game, the moment he assumed boundaries were optional. The chocolates, the note, the delivery, they were merely evidence, proof of a pattern he had created. And as I spoke, I saw his bravado crumble into panic, realized that the fear in his eyes was not directed at me, but at himself, at the undeniable reflection of the man he had become, cornered by his own choices, incapable of negotiating, incapable of pleading, incapable of hiding. He muttered, broken, that Lena wanted counseling, wanted to review messages, wanted the truth, and in that panic I understood fully. Consequences need not be loud to be devastating, need not be violent to be absolute. They must simply be inevitable, precise, and undeniable. And by stepping aside, allowing the truth to reach its rightful recipient, I had executed the perfect reckoning. The door closed. Silence fell. Sarah's eyes, wide, searching, frightened, met mine, and she whispered, "Ethan, what happened to us?" And I didn't answer immediately because the answer was brutal. Our marriage had been tested not by violence, not by betrayal in the conventional sense, but by subtle threats, by hidden messages, by a neighbor who assumed weakness, and by the cracks created by withheld truths. The following days were quiet, heavy with thought, each step cautious, each glance measured, each word weighed against the possibility of misinterpretation. Yet within that silence something shifted. Awareness, vigilance, the hard understanding that love and trust cannot survive in ignorance, that boundaries must be enforced with precision, and that some lessons are learned only when consequences are delivered fully, without hesitation, without compromise, without mercy. Sarah approached me on the fourth day, voice soft, tentative. "We have a counseling appointment for us." And I realized coldly that the real battle had always been within the walls of our home, not across the street, and that the predator next door had been only a symptom of the fractures between us. In the bright, sterile room, across from a therapist whose calm gaze measured every micro-expression, we stripped away months of unspoken truths. She admitted to craving validation, to misreading attention as affirmation, to the loneliness and invisibility that had allowed Marcus to creep into our life. I admitted avoidance, hesitation, misplaced patience, thinking silence was strength, realizing now that it had been vulnerability, and the therapist asked the question that cut sharper than any confrontation. "Would you do the same thing again?" And without hesitation, I said yes, because protecting a marriage demands vigilance, demands strategy, demands ruthlessness when necessary, And because the world is full of men like Marcus, predators who assume boundaries are negotiable, whose charm masks intent, whose smiles are weapons, and some lessons must be delivered without delay, without argument, and without apology. Weeks passed. Marcus dismantled his life methodically, moving boxes into a rental truck. Alone, defeated, face pale, shoulders slumped, his ego shattered, the street returning to the quiet normalcy it had never truly had, while Sarah and I rebuilt. Not what we were, but something stronger, something sharp, something aware of subtle predators and invisible threats, something capable of enforcing boundaries without compromise. Each conversation, each glance, each touch carried weight. In understanding that trust is fragile, that love is resilient only when fortified, that silence is dangerous, and that marriage is not passive, it is a battlefield, and some wars are fought not with shouts, but with observation, consequence, and calculated action. Nights became lessons in vigilance. Every laugh, every smile, every glance at the street or across the porch was measured, analyzed, understood. Sarah rested her head on my shoulder one evening and whispered, "Thank you for fighting for us." And the words carried not relief, not joy, but recognition, understanding, and the brutal clarity of boundaries enforced, of predators exposed, of consequences realized. I didn't ruin Marcus's marriage. I reminded him it existed, and that reminder, surgical, precise, and absolute, was enough to dismantle his assumptions, crush his arrogance, and force reflection. Lena, in counseling, navigated the revelation I had delivered. Marcus confronted his own choices, and the quiet devastation of that household mirrored the precision with which I had acted. Calculated, controlled, and utterly effective. We emerged from the aftermath changed, hardened, vigilant, aware of how easily danger slips through smiles, through seemingly harmless attention, through the cracks left by unspoken truths, and the marriage that survived did so not because of luck or coincidence, but because boundaries had been enforced, consequences had been delivered, and love had been defended with ruthless clarity. Months later, walking down the street, seeing new neighbors move into the Hale house, Sarah's hand in mine, I realized the lesson was clear. Predators do not need swords or violence. They only need access, trust, distraction, or distraction's absence. And some men learn only when their intentions rebound upon them, exposed, undeniable, precise, and permanent. And I understood fully that marriage is not passive, love is not idle, and protection is not gentle. It is measured, unwavering, and sometimes merciless. Because the real threat to what you cherish is never obvious until it is. And by the time it reveals itself, only those who act decisively, ruthlessly, and without hesitation survive. And those who do are remembered not for rage or fury, but for precision, clarity, and the uncompromising will to defend what is theirs, even if that defense must take the shape of a red bag, chocolate hearts, and a sentence that was never written.